Hey, this is Russell Moore, and this is Reading in Exile, and we have been reading in hiatus for a little while, just because I got occupied on a big project. But enough of you have said, when is Reading in Exile coming back? Here we are. And a lot of that has to do with the fact also that there's a book coming out I'm really looking forward to here in the next few weeks, Marilynne Robinson's Jack, which is in her Gilead series. And we talked about the Gilead series. It used to be trilogy, but I guess now that there's four, it's not a trilogy anymore. But when we talked about this, several of you asked particularly for me to look at the book Lila. And so let's do that. Let's talk about Lila. Uh, when I think about this book, it's hard for me not to have the Eric Clapton Layla song playing in the back of my mind. But this book it's a it's a haunting and a beautiful book. I mean, with Robinson, the issue is not plot in the sense of, if you say what happens in this book, because she's dealing with ordinary in the most ordinary sense of the word ordinary life over a long period of time, but there's a lot going on in there. So you're more looking toward the character development, the dialogue, those sorts of things that are happening, than to say this goes on. Lila is a character who shows up in the Gilead area of Iowa. She builds a relationship with this older preacher, and she ends up marrying. But Lila has a really bad past, as a neglected child, and then all sorts of other things that took place. But she's not a caricature. So what's happening here is not that you have this wild person who comes in, and then you have the sage-like wise pastor who's sort of teaching her how to act. It's really not that way. Instead, you see the complexity of this figure of Lila in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a line in the book that says something like this: when you're scalded, touch hurts. It doesn't matter how kindly it's intended. That stuck with me because it really explains a lot of people that I've ministered to over the years, who kind of come in and out from the church and from relationships. And it's not because they're inherently unstable people. It's because what they've lived through means that connection of any sort, even connection with God at first, can seem kind of scary. She really embodies this. But also, I really like the way that you can see in this book Lila coming to experience the Bible. And Robinson really explains somebody experiencing the Bible as a total outsider in really interesting ways, while at the same time, with Reverend Ames, she's showing somebody encountering the Bible as a total insider, somebody who knows all of the Bible and who's making a connection with somebody who's very new to all of this. And in that, I think Robinson gives one of the best fictional descriptions of preaching that I've seen, of the craft of preaching. Where what she talks about is, for instance, there's a conversation between Reverend Ames and Lila where she's talking about her past, and he says this. I've written it down. I think you're asking me these questions because of some hard things that have happened, the things you don't talk about. If you did tell me about them, I could probably not say more than that life is a very deep mystery, and that finally the grace of God is all that can resolve it. And the grace of God is also a very deep mystery. You can probably tell, and this is important, he says, you can probably tell that I've said these same words too many times, but they're true. Now, I think that she really does understand in this text preaching, because she talks about elsewhere how Reverend Ames, when he says something Lila knows it must come from the Bible because he's happiest when he's quoting the Bible. And so there's a sense of what I think is absolutely right when it comes to preaching and teaching the Bible, that it's not just the text in front of you. It's all of the text of the Bible that's informing and shaping the way that you come to that Bible, including all those ways that the text has shaped you and inhabited you and changed you in ways that you might not even consciously recognize, but you're fitting all of these things together. And that it includes this sort of wrestling with the kinds of questions that God raises by the particularities of life, particularities of your life, the particularities of someone else's life. I remember, this is just one example, I remember when I was preaching every week, having a woman in the congregation who came to me with her daughter who was having a cutting issue, not something that I had ever experienced. It shaped the way that I saw the text I was preaching the next week and for weeks to come, not because I was saying, well, how does this passage from Isaiah apply to cutting, but because it caused me to say, what causes this in the life of this girl? And what story is she telling herself about herself, or that she's believing about what other people are telling her? And how does God address that in good news through this text? Well, this book seems to get that. But also in that same conversation, and this shows up elsewhere in the book, Reverend Ames is saying, he said, I've said this many times. I think what he's getting across to her is you're not, even though everybody else in the town seems to be upstanding and respectable, you're not in a unique category. You're a sinner, and we all are. And so the Bible actually is addressing you. Grace actually is addressing you. And he talks about this really beautifully, where he sort of is, he's not explaining to her like he's standing up lecturing to her. He's sort of wrestling through this with her. And he says, your past, it's not random, but he says your experiences, they don't accumulate like money. And he says this, we don't have a way to reconcile its elements, meaning all the things we've lived through in our past, because they are what they're given out of no necessity at all, except God's grace in sustaining us as creatures we can recognize as ourselves. Now that would take years to contemplate, but this moment is coming in this really ordinary passage. And I also like the way that, again, in Lila, you have somebody who is encountering Christianity as strange because of her background. She doesn't know anything about this. So she's sort of thinking through these concepts of resurrection, and she's thinking about all these difficult things that people wrestle with, such as hell. So in one passage, she says, maybe you don't have to think about hell a lot in the way that she is, because you probably don't know anybody who's going to end up there. And he said, I suppose there's an element of truth in that. So she feels the weightiness of this. And then elsewhere in the book, she starts reading the Bible, and she starts reading Ezekiel. And Robinson really sets this up brilliantly, because he's sort of, I'm glad she's reading the Bible, but Ezekiel, wheels within wheels. And it's a very complex book, and in some ways a kind of scary and gloomy book in the canon. But she says, no, I like this, because Ezekiel, he knows what certain things feel like that metaphor that God uses through Ezekiel of Israel as a baby that's left by the side of the road in a field. She can experience that. And so you see her grappling with Ezekiel, and you see Ames grappling with the fact that she's grappling with Ezekiel. And I think what you see there is a welcoming strangeness of Christianity. She gets it because she sees this is not respectable middle class life. This is something that is far deeper than that, far stranger than that. And she is starting to get, this is actually calling me. It's speaking to me. There's a welcoming nature to this strangeness. And I thought it was just beautiful when at one point, Ames is talking about grace. He talks about grace a lot. And Lila says, well, that's what you want to believe. And Ames says, that doesn't mean it isn't true. I think there is a lot in that statement. And another thing that really stands out to me is this is sort of a side development in this book, but the friendship that you see in all of the books between these two pastors, Presbyterian one, Congregationalist in another, of these two pastors who are friends with one another and have been for many, many years. At one point, one of them says to the other, no matter what happens, I'm on your side. And the response is, you are. You always are, even when I'm not. And I just wonder how many of you have ever had a friendship like that, where you can say, I know that you're on my side, even when I'm not on my own side. I have some friendships like that, and they're grace of God. So this book is it's a beautiful book, and I think that as you read it, you'll grow to have some compassion on this figure of Lila, who's going to seem sort of aloof to you at first, and you're going to grow to love her, and you're also going to see, you're going to have compassion on Ames as he's trying to grapple with all of this. And above all, I think you'll see what Robinson's trying to show, which is just these little flashes of grace in the ordinary. So that's Lila. Let me know in the comments what book or books you would like for us to talk about next time here on Reading in Exile. This is Russell Moore.